this is it, you can take resistance can be an approach, integration, complete embrace to replacing yourself potentially, just don't tell anybody, however that might work. So there are different approaches, and those are all reflected in the community of practice in terms of how it might work. And that's largely dependent, of course, upon the context you're in with your discipline and your own personal approach and what kind of thing you're teaching. So I kind of want to draw attention first to Emma, who is teaching some writing classes, which I think are particularly potentially enhanced and also vexed by AI.
It's probably good that everyone in the community practice introduces themselves, because I know we have people from all of our campus.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
Do we have to, like?
It sounds like it's picking us up fine, so I don't think we need to worry about
This
that.
is one of those smart rooms right now.
No. It doesn't have any room mics, the mic's over there.
Okay. All right,
But
so just project.
so far it
Let's
seems
see what
good.
it-
Yeah, so yeah, let's go ahead and do that real quick then. Starting with
Jill Purdy, professor in the Milgard School of Business.
Julie Masura, teaching professor, the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences.
Emma Rose, Arts and Sciences. I teach in Writing Studies and Innovation and Design.
Andrew Balderas, School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences, I can say that. And I teach Literature and American Studies.
Chris Beasley, Associate Professor of Social Science Research Methods, also in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences.
Ruben Casas, Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences in the Writing Studies program.
Hi, Ellen Moore, I teach in communication. I am the chair of the CAP division and I'm a teaching professor.
And online we have Alex.
Hey, Alex Miller, School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences. I teach literature and labor studies. I'm wishing I'd made it in. I didn't realize so many people were going to be there in person. We did all of this online, so it would have been cool to actually see folks.
And Todd.
Todd Conaway, I'm an instructional designer way up north here in Bothell.
And I don't think anybody else in the community is on Zoom.
I'm in both places.
You're in both places, so we're remote. Is that AI, Ellen? So,
Yes, yeah, ask for anything.
so maybe we'll cover for you, Alex, if you want to sprint over here. We're pretty close. In the meantime, while Alex is maybe running to the room, Emma, do you want to talk about your experience with AI?
Sure. As I just introduced myself, I'm in Writing Studies, but I teach in our technical communication side. So I teach a lot of the kinds of writing that it turns out that generative AI sometimes is pretty good at doing, like writing a basic email, right? Like those are some of the things that I do in my lower level classes where we're just teaching people how to do professional writing. So I feel like, to sum up, or maybe to start with some summary comments, like I feel like that my relationship with AI is like a real roller coaster. And it's changing every quarter, and it's going up and down every quarter. And it is really impacted by the level of students, I think, and also because I teach students from all the different disciplines on campus, I see so much variation and diversity in how students feel about AI. And then thinking about my own teaching practices. And then the other, I think, complicating factor is what the relationship with me, my students, AI, and then modality. So the difference of teaching in person, face-to-face, versus asynchronous remotely with students is really different when it comes to having open conversations about this technology. So when I have had open conversations, which I like to do, because that's my pedagogy, that's why I like to relate to our students, what I've learned over the past year is that students are petrified of being called cheaters. Many of them are just in fear of screwing up. And they have heard these stories in the media that, like, even if you use Grammarly, you perhaps are going to be accused of cheating. So there's a real fear about it. Again, like from my experience with my students, and when we open up, it even takes like just a little bit for them to warm up enough to feel like, can I really tell her that I was using it for something? Like there just is a lot of mistrust, which kind of breaks my heart because that's not the place that I want to start with my students. Simultaneously, I want them to learn how to write so they can use it as a tool to expand their world, not to restrict them. And I have in my course policy, I have a very, which you can see on the site, a very sort of conversational tone in my policy that is about writing is thinking, and there really is no shortcut to it. And so I want you to have this experience of doing this forever. So that's it. Those are some, there's a lot of preamble comments, but like I do want to share one thing that I do in my upper level class. Those are the students, like we have so much fun with it because I feel like that they've done some of those like beginning things that now we can have different kinds of conversations about how it's changing our work practices, right? And so one of the assignments that I do in my upper level class is that at the beginning of the quarter, I have a relatively low stakes assignment where they create some technical documentation. And then we have a module on AI, we talk all about it, and then towards the end, I have them redo that first assignment using ChatGPT or whatever model they would like to use. And then they get to look at the comparison and get to say, oh, it's better in some ways, but it's actually worse in others. And so, and it allows them to have their words as, and what they know that they really like worked hard to produce and what the alternative is, and sometimes it's better and sometimes it's not. So I feel like it's a really nuanced conversation, and then I'll conclude by saying I struggle to have that kind of nuance in my asynchronous online classes about it because it's much more, it feels just more transactional. And when I'm teaching writing online and asynchronous, and it's in this transactional space, it's very hard to get under that surface to be like, let's talk about what this is good for, when they're like, here's my 3 assignments. So that's what I continue to struggle with, is like the intersection of all these factors of our students, their disciplines, the modality, the level, and then my professional practice. So hopefully that meant something. It was a lot.
I mean, one of the reasons that we split this, besides time, these Elevate sessions into 2 around policy is because, and kind of activities and the actual classroom work, because policy is almost always quite transactional in the class, right? I mean, so it kind of feels that way no matter what. Then you add this layer on of asynchronous, AI, new stuff. And so it gets at also the fact that policy alone can't work, so how it works out in the classroom is so important. And it also gets at the roots of, it's not, most students don't want to cheat, they're afraid of cheating, and that might limit them from the tools. So to me, a thing about AI is it magnifies many interesting pedagogical questions that we should be focusing on anyway. So instead of trying to cheat-proof a class, we should be looking at why is it that students might be trying to cheat, or why they might be going around the different policies and rules, and address that and design courses better. And AI gives us a chance to do that. So I think those are really interesting. And I'm going to throw it over, if you don't mind, to Ellen, because I see some connections between your class this quarter and some of the things Emma was just talking about.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I actually, so in my class, so I purposely taught a freshman level core class this last autumn, which was a mistake. If you ever chair of anything, don't ever create new content all quarter long. But so I created this class, and I created the class, and the topic was AI. But it was AI as studied from all these different perspectives. So, you know, arts and humanities, the social science perspective. And I did that, and I knew that we were going to be talking about it as a topic all quarter long, but how would I get them to do this paper that I've been doing with my students for the last 10 years, which is a research article evaluation, where they have to read an article, they have to then summarize, you know, they have to summarize that article, they have to evaluate the article and critique it. And I actually did, so Claude AI is my nemesis, but also my partner, because Claude AI can do it all. If you go, it's CLAUDE, but Claude, so where ChatGPT could not write a good paper because I ran through the prompt a few times, Claude could do it all and do it beautifully. Claude can also analyze movies, which is what I, you know, teach on a lot of my class. So what I ended up having my students do was I ended up doing something, and I wasn't sure if it would work, but I chose an article, and the article was actually on AI girlfriends. So it was on this rise of the use of AI girlfriends who will do all sorts of things online.
And boyfriends.
And well, actually, it's a very gender phenomenon. It's mostly men seeking out these AI women. And so what I had them do is I said, I'm going to pick out this article for you. You won't see it. You won't know anything about it. But you're going to have to come into class and summarize it, do all this work, and do it in an old school blue book. And this made them nervous. So what I did was I had to scaffold. Here's how you would do this. Here's how you think about it. Here's how you summarize an article. We practiced in class on other articles. So the day came, and they all sat in there for an hour and a half. And I was actually quite pleased with what they did because they had to do it by themselves first. But I then had them hold on to their blue book. I graded that, of course. And then they had to ask AI to do the same thing. The same prompt, everything else, they just fed it into Claude. And what I thought, I was worried because I thought that what they were going to say was that Claude did a much better job and now everybody should just be using Claude for this assignment and not them. But that's not what happened. Because I had given this around week 6 or 7, they had this time to build this critical perspective and this relationship to the technology in the class. They actually began to critique the fact that Claude never picked up on the fact that it was all women who wrote the article and it was a feminist perspective, and Claude missed out on that. And actually missed out on a lot of the big broad points in the article. So my students were a lot more critical than I thought that they would be, and it was beautiful. So both were graded. The one that they had to do in class was graded, but also the second iteration, their critical evaluation of Claude's evaluation formed the second basis for their grade, and they loved it, and actually I liked it too. So for me, AI is really important, kind of what Emma was saying. It's really important that students, I don't want them to use AI to sort of start the way that they're thinking about some critical evaluation. I want them to do that themselves. I think that's where learning takes place. And this way, the way I had scaffolded it seemed to work in that way.
And I think you experienced some of the speed of AI change as well, where you had things planned for your courses that then AI was not responding the same way anymore. Is that?
Yeah, ChatGPT refused to hallucinate on a prompt that I had used 2 days before. So AI was constantly changing in my class, and that's okay. We actually talked about the fact that it was changing so fast and how to teach on that.
And I think that is one of the, significant questions facing all of us is just how fast this changes, but also how much it's going to change. Because there's a lot that's kind of unknown, even in some cases to the people who are building the AI systems themselves. So it's unclear if this kind of steep trajectory we see of improvement is going to keep going, or if we're kind of reaching a point where it's going to start leveling off and it's just going to be more of the same in 2 years. It's really hard to tell, and so we have to be constantly adjusting on the fly to account for that and to see what the technology is now, which really is, I think, an important point too, is you need to be embracing and trying the AI yourself. You don't have to use it, you don't have to love it, but you have to at least try to understand what's really happening. It's not enough to work in the abstract, because they do change, and there are many different systems, right? I mean, ChatGPT, Claude, I think are the 2 that were most used, but there are scores, hundreds, probably more out there that focus on different areas or have different capabilities. Especially, for instance, in technical classes or programming classes where he's not able to be here today. Chris Marriott has really embraced using AI as kind of the co-pilot, literally it's the brand name, but also in building and programming because it's so powerful. It's just a tool you're going to be using. You plus AI will be stronger in that field than you alone, and so you really need to do that, which is not the same, for instance, learning to think through AI. Learning to think through writing, you can't really substitute.
I want to know if Todd or Alex, who we have not forgotten about, have anything that they want to share, and then I wonder if we can maybe open it up to our audience to see if you have questions or comments.
Sure, I'm happy to go first. Yeah, I really appreciated the space. These meetings, for me at least, I came into the academic year feeling like I'd forgotten to do my homework. It seemed like our first meeting, everybody had ideas about AI and how they were planning on using it. And I think my ideas of AI were exclusively anxiety, stress, misgivings about how it was going to change everything I do here at UWT. And I think, as Emma said, I think, I do believe, having taught writing before, writing is thinking. I think learning is a journey, and I was worried that AI was going to offer students a shortcut, right, from sort of point A to point C. And I kind of always saw myself in my classroom as point B, right? And so it's like, if they're circumnavigating the actual learning process, just kind of really anxious about that. And so I felt behind, but the conversations we had over the fall, what I realized was, we're kind of all in the process of figuring things out. Faculty and students alike. And so I think the conversations have really helped these conversations, but also the conversations I've had with students. And I think, the act of crafting an AI use policy where I kind of explain my personal sort of, philosophy of education, right? This idea that it's a journey and that, I honor that journey, and my goal as a guide is to lead students through the process. The students, I feel like when I begin class, on the day where we cover the syllabus and I spend time actually talking about that, it creates a space for students to also weigh in and share their experiences with AI. And like Jill said, a number of them, even this quarter, still hadn't really, I mean, they'd heard of it, but they hadn't had much like firsthand experience with it. And what it allowed me to do was, because I didn't want to turn my class over to AI, I'm definitely interested in like, teaching a course that revolves around issues connected to it. But I mean, I taught Intro to Labor Studies in the fall. Like I didn't want to just talk about AI the whole time. Instead, what I did was we created situations where we were allowed to kind of like critique AI and its capabilities in kind of a way that service some of the learning goals of the course. So for example, what I did, I had, my courses involve like 3 essays that get progressively longer. With the first essay, I had students do a peer workshop, like a formal written peer workshop where they're supposed to write, 200 words or so in response to a student essay. And then they also had AI generate a response to that same student essay. And then in class, we spent time talking about kind of the differences in terms of just kind of like what AI picked up on, how valid was the critique. And actually, like in some cases, the peer review you get from AI is actually pretty strong. I mean, it picks up on things that the students noted were worthy comments. And then there were also just sort of, strange things that it was really focusing in on that seemed kind of beside the point. And then what I did last quarter, and what I think I'm going to do again this quarter, is then I flipped it. And with the second assignment, I started with AI generating an essay in response to the prompt. And, I brought in copies and handed them out and, had the entire class look at them, and we just picked them apart. So we kind of wrote our own feedback to the AI generated essay. And that was really cool. And it was just a way of, talking about AI in a way that's also really focused on what I really want to talk about, which is, the history of early 20th century labor, for example. So it was, just kind of finding interesting ways of like incorporating it into the class to show students that I'm aware that it exists and that I do have sort of questions about its utility, that I understand it's a tool, but it's also a tool that can be certainly misused. So I'm feeling more comfortable about it now. I think, modality matters, like folks have said. But yeah, I've kind of figured out a spot where it's in my class, we're talking about it, but I'm not allowing it to dominate. And hopefully by actually addressing it, I'm also not sort of letting students think that I'm not aware of it and that, they can sort of use it for, academic malfeasance.
So as Marissa said, I think if you're on Zoom, feel free to drop questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll get you integrated if you're in the room. You can throw out a question, we'll recognize you here. We want to try to keep this as awkward as this weird hybrid can be. We want to try to keep some conversation going. I do think it's important just to note quickly that the last session was about policy, and one of the things in that session, one of the 3 principles was you do need to have at least classroom policy recognizing AI as a thing. I think as Alex was saying, you don't want to make people think you don't know about it, but more importantly, you just want to kind of provide some context. But that needs to be customized and then followed up through at least discussion, if not integration with the class. So far we've heard from multiple people who've had, I think, a array of experience with AI. Does anybody resonate with anyone? Do you have questions? What have you experienced? Looks like we have a question coming in from the chat.
This is from Laura. Do you have a few practical tips for faculty who do not teach writing and may not have the time to incorporate, critique, or take part in AI? That's the first part.
How can you structure assignments prompts to mitigate the possibility of just using AI without approval?
This is really awkward, but can I ask Chris?
I was going to say,
I think,
take that.
yeah, I would love to hear your response to that, Chris.
Yeah, sorry.
You can say no. Yeah.
I think one thing that's been important to me is to help students think about using it as an extension rather than a replacement for themselves. So I think it's one thing for me to put that in my policy to say that to students, but I think it's always helpful to articulate like specific examples to really help students understand like what that means. not only for them, but as a culture, like how can this not be a replacement of us, but a tool that we can. So a couple ways that I do that, in the writing, I have them use it as a peer review partner, and have them give the instructions and assignments, put the rubric in, put their writing in, and then give a structured prompt to help them think through not only what are the strengths of their writing, but how can that writing be improved. So that's a peer review partner. But in non-writing classes, I have them use it as a tutor. So I have them do things like put a block of text from the book into AI and say, can you explain this to me? Can you explain it another way? Can you explain it another way? Can you give me some examples of this? If there's a particular area that they're interested in, a particular topic, they can ask AI to give them some examples related to their specific topic. They can put applications in there. So how could I use this in a certain way? Also to get some feedback. So sort of moving beyond that, if they think they understand it in a certain way, if they have some ideas of how that theory or that concept might be able to be used for the topic they're interested in, they can ask AI for feedback. And then I think important in that, I always encourage them to think about, and this is somebody else on the committee sort of talked about, like giving them an analogy that like AI is like your friend. And I kind of extend that a little bit and think about like, well, your friend is often wrong too. Sometimes they're right. Even professors, like we're often wrong. You know, I see things written on the board sometimes when I come into class.
Yeah.
It's wrong, right? So that's an important thing for them to know that like there's peers are wrong,
Yeah.
consultants are wrong, we're wrong all the time. AI is wrong sometimes too, and so to take it with a grain of salt. But to use that as a partner where they can get feedback and they can get different solutions.
I offer some really practical advice to the question because I thought about this a lot. One of the things that we want students to be able to do is think. And one of the ways we can help scaffold assignments or build assignments so that AI is not doing the thinking for them is to embed some of the thinking in the process of how they might answer the question. And again, I think the advice that you need to become familiar with that AI is incredibly important. But if you ask your students something that requires them to apply their thinking and learning, it's harder to just use AI, right? So if you say, using theories or models from class, discuss the whatever, right? The more specific the prompt is for AI, the more likely it is going to be able to do the thinking for them, or at least produce a viable answer. And if you write a more generalized question or a question that requires them to take mental steps and make some cognitive decisions about the material before they could ever enter it into AI, that will help. You may find that that is less precise and it challenges you a little bit more in terms of grading, because if you say, use a model from class, sometimes you'll be surprised that students will pick a model that's not the one you thought they were going to use. But that's not a bad thing necessarily. It might be valid and it might be very creative. Now, there's nothing that if they pick a model and they put the details of that model and ideas from class into AI might be able to spit out an answer. But at least I know they've done some thinking or be able to effectively prompt their large language model to do that. So that's been my strategy for those assignments, because I too am not teaching writing. The scaffolding is limited by other learning objectives we're trying to meet. So how do I just prevent it? The other thing that I do is make it safe to say, if you are going to use AI, I'm going to be able to detect it because I've read millions of things in my life from students, and AI is not that good yet. But if you're honest with it, and if I'm asking them to write something in which they need to provide references, that is a tool that they have used to produce it, and they need to reference it. And they need to explain to me, not just, I use ChatGPT, but what did you do? And I find that very telling, because if you're teaching something that's a little bit more technical in nature, I find it's more common for students to use it for specific technical blocks. For example, writing little blocks of code that's easy, like, and way before AI, certain students have been taking blocks of code or blocks of analysis because they're out there. But a lot of them are less comfortable with actually writing and figuring out how to structure their writing in a way that makes sense. And the process of them prompting a AI tool to do it is actually a good learning process. So if they can describe that to me and explain that to me, then I don't consider that to be cheating. But the fact that they're kind of required to do it and they believe, right or wrong, that I can detect it, that makes a big difference. And actually, I can detect it. I had a few students who used it for an assignment that they weren't supposed to. It was eminently clear to me because of the way I had structured the assignment. And the answer did not match to what we had talked about in class. And it's like, I'm pretty sure you didn't take the graduate seminar that this is normally discussed in our field. And there's no way you would have known about this.
To Jill, kind of pulling off what Jill was saying, this is Ellen. I'll just say briefly that I'm teaching online asynchronous next quarter. And one thing, and of course it's very discussion post heavy, very writing heavy. And there's two things I do, and one is I ask for specific quotes from the reading. I really like it when students engage with the reading. It's demonstration of knowledge to me. And I've noticed that even Claude is not very good. ChatGPT won't do it. It won't pull out quotes, it refuses, it freaks out. But Claude will do it, but they're not very good quotes. So I ask my students to pull out a couple of quotes and then tell me why, this is kind of to Jill's point, tell me why they chose those quotes. But the second part of the assignment, I then say, tie it into at least two concepts from class. Sometimes I'll do a mini lecture, tie it into that. It forces them to watch the mini lecture to tie in. There's no way that they can use, AI for that. So getting more granular while still being productive, still being creative has been really helpful for me.
Anyone else have thoughts on that question of kind of quick or relatively straightforward interventions or how that can work?
I think these were good, like level 2 tips. I think the level 1 tip is offering students clarity, which uses feel cheatery and which ones don't. If it's okay to use AI to edit your paper or to create an outline or to ask for better explanation, say that. And if there are other uses that to you feel wrong, say that too. I don't know that it's fair to assume that students and us have all the same assumptions about what is an appropriate use and what isn't.
I mean, one kind of commonality here is that everything that has been discussed so far around are amplifications of pedagogical principles that go back forever. I mean, one answer to how do you deal with AI could be, well, go back to Paulo Freire in the 70s and listen to him. Because a lot of it is about authentic assessment, scaffolding, process documentation, personalization, context-based learning. So I think it's a great possibility to think about AI as a vector to improving general pedagogy. I'm seeing something stream by here about code of conduct. So I'm just going to read the question for the room. Thank you for organizing the space. I'm still curious how we can approach this topic with respect to all parties, including students that prefer not to use it for ethical or other reasons. Is it developing a unique code of conduct for each class with students? Is there another more practical, faster way to address a wide variety of feelings in the classroom over AI use? Assignments will increasingly incorporate AI. I would personally like to respect that students' opinions are not just a mob on AI. Yeah, that's a complicated question. I just want to boil it down to then it sounds like if there's a wide range of approaches, you may have students who don't want to use AI on one end, and if you're requesting or asking for it, that's potentially a problem, which you can address. But there's also the code of conduct, and then the process if you suspect there's a problem that you can't resolve within the classroom.
So has there been someone on this panel who's had a student that said no? I'm prompted to intentionally use. I'm just kind of curious. Use or not? To use and say
Is
no.
this about privacy concerns, students who don't want to input their data or their work in something that then can use it for its own purposes? Is that kind of the direction of the question?
Well, go ahead, Nelson.
Hi, this is Andrea. I've actually had concerns about requiring students to use AI at home because of this, and also because of the more reliable models that do a better job of behind paywalls. And so I've never wanted to require any students to use it at home. So I've struggled with this a little bit, and my solution was to bring in, like Alex was saying, he brought in the paper copies. I've done something similar where I do the inputting and then bring it in. I haven't explored that enough, but I do think that that's something important to keep in mind is that students have either or both ethical reasons for not wanting to do that, concerns about adding to material that the AI can use to generate more material. They don't want to contribute to that, just as many authors have decided they don't want to. But also simply that, I don't want to ask them to spend more resources on it. So I think that's definitely something that we should be thinking about when we have assignments built around assessing AI. So not really an answer, but a reinforcement of this concern.
And there are definitely equity and access issues on multiple levels to be concerned about.
And being prepared to offer options for anyone who does want to opt out seems like practical advice.
I mean, so one answer has to be establishing before a person takes a class what you're going to require them. I mean, we require all kinds of technology we didn't used to and all kinds of access we didn't. Doesn't mean we want to say necessarily you have to use AI, but you can say that this is going to be a requirement. And then also, of course, what are the inputs? I don't think inputting prompts is typically a problem that students have with or people have with it's when you're putting whole text in, your own text you're going in, which comes to open education in a whole different thing.
I mean, I think, probably not time for this discussion today, but I think the conversation about AI sometimes I think holds AI to a different standard than other technology that we use. Because a lot of times like people will be happy like using Facebook for messaging or having things on the cloud or sending things in like Gmail as like attachments and embedding things. And those are all data that AI sort of has used and continues to use for like generating models. So we use all these systems, we enter our data there, but then in AI, we have a conversation about the
So did we ask users if it was okay to use their Facebook data to generate the model? And would people have made different choices if we had?
Yeah, we have a question. Yep.
This is Cassie. I'm an assistant teaching professor at IES, also teaching writing studies. So I feel like I'm really grateful to hear from all of you. I've been a little bit anxious and lazy with my approach to this. But two things happened recently that made me kind of rethink, and I'm curious about Chris's perspective on this. One happened in a first year writing course where students are learning to do academic research. And I had asked about, how they had used AI, had heard of it, in what ways it was informing, their classwork. And I adopted a policy without a lot of discussion that asks students not to use AI in the classroom. So a student raised his hand and said, well, I can't not use it because when I Google something, it's going to, generate responses in BARD or in other kind of extensions. That makes sense. So kind of like I can't, it's right there for me, that I can't not look at it. And then in an upper division course, students were working through a pretty complex text, and there was a question about what biopower means. And the student looked it up in ChatGPT, which is kind of an interesting exercise. But when I asked for him to kind of unpack the rationale for that, he actually said he didn't know of any other way to find the answer. And so we talked about, looking at the critical bibliography and the text as a sign, using Wikipedia, using Google to understand that it's not just a word that's out there, it's a word that has a history that's developed by, a specific leader. But I hadn't heard of him, right? The way to get the information, the first way to get the information was through AI. And there was in either case, there was no ill intent, I don't think. And so I just think that as AI becomes more integrated and more sophisticated, the conversation is going to have to change fast. So, what do you think about that?
We did discuss just being a big old shrug emoji before. That may be the answer to a few of these questions.
I mean, that's part of that quick trajectory. The integration is happening so quickly that along parallels with other tools that we use and just accept happen, we may see AI take more and more of a role that way that we can't really escape it in that way. But then you do have the issue that it can expose then if you're a student, I mean, that exposed something they needed to learn. So in a way, that can be a good thing. If they didn't know where else to go or how else to start that research, I had some comments in some of the activities in the community around it's not a research tool, it's not a place to research, it's a place to begin your exploration, right? That if you treat it as the research tool, it's going to be challenging. But I know I use AI all the time. I go to ChatGPT instead of search quite regularly because it just gives me more coherent answers to then look for more on. But I do think that it's a very tangled web. It has to be approached. That's why simple answers are just really hard to come by. Because it's really hard to generalize across groups and curriculum tools and the changing tools and around what you're doing in your class. So again, it comes back down to those kind of sound pedagogical principles and their adaptation. I would think that most of the people in the community, and if you go to the AI site, you can see what they did for their activities and assessments and policy. That's probably going to change every quarter. It's probably changed since the time that I put it on the site a couple of days ago in some cases. So you have to just be agile with it. But I don't think that, I remember, if you're old enough like me, you can remember when search engines really took off and the web really took off in these very same kinds of inputs. But we've come to learn how to deal with it over time and our adaptation and thinking. In some ways, work and projects continue, but in many cases, without it.
If we have a lull, I wanted, not to put anyone on the spot, but if Todd, Ruben, or Julie wanted to share anything that they've been thinking about as they've been to, or, yeah, to Bonnie, sorry.
Oh, well, I just had a question. I also just want to hear from those other folks, so I'm okay holding my question. If other folks want to just tell us a bit about their, I'm really curious.
We'll let them think for a second. If
Okay,
there is something
okay.
you've been wanting to share but haven't been able to get in there,
Okay.
you can go after Bonnie.
Okay, so my question is, I'm noting that there are quite a few people who are here who are in sort of academic support positions. I noticed Rtita's here from Conduct, we've got a bunch of folks here from TLC. And so I'm trying to think about this from a campus level, given that everybody is writing their own policies and those policies are changing quarter to quarter, and there's no requirement to make a policy at all. So the question is, how do we support you, how do we support students, and how do we keep the integrity that we're supposed to be keeping on the sort of campus level? I'm wondering if anyone has thought this through. Like, my gut is, whatever the policy says, you apply that policy to that context. But beyond that, is there anything we can do at the campus level?
I actually have something to say about this, because one of the things that surprised me last quarter is both direct feedback, and then it also showed up in the teaching evaluations. I think the one thing that students expressed the most gratitude for was that I had told them what in this class was an acceptable use of AI and what was. I had one student come up to me after we had the discussion in class. I had a student write about it during an assignment where I asked them, now that we've had some time thinking about this, we've read a few things, where do you stand on this? Does use of AI in a class like this constitute plagiarism or not? And whatever your answer, can you articulate a few things that a student might be able to do with AI that you think would be an ethical use of it? In that context that came up, a few students said, I appreciate it when professors tell me what I can and can't do with it. And then it came up again in peer evaluations. 2 students mentioned, I appreciated that in this class, the professor told us what we could do and couldn't do with it. Mm-hmm. So I'm not hearing from students in any of the conversations that we had or points where they could tell me that they think or want an overall campus policy. I'm not hearing that from my colleagues either. I think what I'm hearing from students is that, well, it depends, and we would like some guidance from our instructors about how to make good choices about when and how to use it.
If I can add to that, I completely agree. It's just a patchwork, right? Students are looking at a patchwork of policies, and it's very confusing. And what I tell my students and continue to tell them is, I'm empowering you to ask your professors what their policy is. Because what my fear is that those of us who may not have policies are going to, it'll be a disservice to students because of that uncertainty. And I worry about them getting like caught up in some sort of punitive, like, unless we express it, we all have in our mind what's okay. And so, like, I think it's great that we're all developing policies, and I encourage all of our peers to, but I also encourage our students to explicitly ask if it's a class. But like I started with, they're so afraid of being like accused of plagiarizing, like I don't know if they're gonna feel empowered to ask that question.
Yeah, it's something like a policy would just simply be that the professor sort of sets the expectations, because to Ruth's point, to Emma's a bit, this is Ellen. You know, the idea is that in my syllabus, and this was part of the work that we had done that was so powerful, that my syllabus states, you know, you will hear when it's okay to use AI and for what in this class, and if you don't hear that, then I expect that you're writing this on your own. And that's been really helpful because students know when I explicitly mention it, and so we have those conversations, so.
Julie, did you?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, the policy part when joining this community was something, you know, that I didn't really think of, and so my response to the prompt for our assignments, we had homework to do, was that I don't have one that I have used, because I don't know how I would enforce it or how I would explain it. And so I wanted to clarify that I am a geoscience instructor, so I'm like, so taking this data, explain what you're seeing. So is that something that AI could do? Probably, but more you can tell because the writing is pretty succinct, you know, and they're writing it pretty much in real time. I suspect that that's not an issue at this point. So I hadn't put a policy. I like having ones that are developed that are given to us from other, you know, from Darcy had wrote up something great to use and stuff. And talking with these folks, I was really lucky to have these two in my, I think we were in the chat or small group, right? Yeah. So these guys have been playing with this for a very long time and I hadn't. And actually thought it very negatively because our chemistry instructors run into this a lot when they're writing reports. It's like that. It's nuts. But so long story long, policy to me is kind of new because I didn't know how to apply it in my courses the way that I teach. I'm teaching majors and non-majors. And more the science that they're learning from me is reflected from their personal experience and their observations, right? So I do want to talk just really briefly about the assignments part. Is the assignments part in using this tool in my courses, or at least in my research lab, is to helping students write introductions and conclusions, because that's probably the hardest thing, the worst written, the poorliest written thing. So I wanted to play with that. So that was my playing tool. So I just wanted to share that early on. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps at all, but yeah, like I don't know.
And maybe another question, and I hate to put Darcy on the spot, but like, is there something tri-campus wise that's happening?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I just put a link up in the chat, the Teaching at UW site and the Teaching at UW Collaborative actually used a lot of the resources out of this community of practice and the syllabi that you provided to come up with a structure for what should be included in a policy and a syllabus. And so that page is like use, like how often you want students to use it and in what capacity in your class, why you chose this approach in your course, consequences, which is a term that we need to approach, and questions. Students should be readily available to come to you with questions if they have any use of AI. And then also a privacy reminder that students have, you know, we don't have at UW a contract with Popular AI Systems like ASU just signed one, and they have an internal AI system that is private to their students. Those discussions are in the works at UW. Whether anything comes of that, we don't know. It's very early in this process. But there are sample syllabi language out there for you to hone for your own courses that is prohibitive use, full use, or restricted use. So those are out there. It's really, you know, you have to cater to your own class and your own use case. But we're working on it, ongoing, on tri-campus level.
The fact that we're talking about it is such a new thing too, which is great that we have this meeting. And it is happening in tri-campus in many different places.
This is Ellen. I have to leave in a few minutes, but I wanted to say I really appreciate these conversations. And I also appreciate all the work that's going into trying to like think about how to address this. But also, I just want to bring up an element of power because keep in mind that when ChatGPT was created, the creators actually had a version where anybody in a college could feed a paper through and it would say whether or not ChatGPT wrote the paper and they chose not to release it. And so I also just, I mean, I love this conversation. I really appreciate us all being really conscientious because we are. And I really do wish that that the makers of AI had consulted with colleges and universities because they could have made that available. And I know Certina's here or was, right? And so you know, because the interest is there, but they had the ability to let us know if it was written by their own software, their own AI the whole time. So if there's a certain level of frustration that accompanies this sort of really good productive dialogue.
I also want to point out, just for the record, the teaching.washington.edu site that came up in the chat. Teaching.washington.edu has a lot of resources, Tri-Campus resources, which includes what Darcy was talking about around AI. I also think that's a site that illustrates the limits that kind of Bonnie is kind of reaching, where what you can do at an institutional level, it has to be by necessity fairly generic. It can't be policy like you will have in your classroom. That is why, in addition to that, on the community of practice site, among the resources, we have many, many more examples of policy and assignments, not just from the community, but from other faculty around UWT, what they're doing, how they're personalizing it and how they're approaching it, because you really do have to do the work ultimately in your own class, because whatever policy you might get from UW, teaching at UW or wherever else, it's not gonna mean much in your class. In the same way that you wanna have a statement about academic dishonesty potentially or something in your syllabus, it doesn't mean much on its own. It has to be integrated into the actual operations and workings of the learning community. And that's what a lot of this is working toward, and why we have worked so hard to get examples from real life practice of what has happened. Granted, it's AI, so maybe out of date by now.
While we've been sitting here.
So I do want to be cognizant of time. It's 1:25, so I know people have to get to other activities, but I'm happy to, and I'm sure if we have any other comments or questions or final thoughts, we can certainly hear them now.
And we do want to shout out our website. We had other community participants who couldn't be here. Their activities, policies, and learning objects are going to be available online. There are some really cool.
The people that are giving depositions, is there anything you can do to help? Charitable?
Do you want to, Frankie, can you pull up the webpage real quick with the
Current.
community for everyone, since we're, and if you want to scan your phone or whatever, you can get to it that way. But here you will find all of the policies, assignments, and activities from everyone's community that provided them, resources like we were talking about around policy from other faculty and instructors, and then where to go from there. And everybody's thinking about this right now, to a large part, and that's why across institutions, people are thinking about it intensely.
I want to say, like, one of the things that we can do, one of the roles that we serve, I think, in education is serving up for our students. Like, how do we think, how do we use tools, and so that's one of the things.
Now we're going to be evicted.
I always make sure when I use AI for something in the classroom, that I provide students with the prompts that I use, and that way I'm always.
Kind of a waste of your time, but still at least, well, that's still admin though, wouldn't it be?
And that's really where those brass tacks of literally what did you do step by step and how did it work? It's so much, because it's easy to say, well, have them craft the prompt and then respond to it. It's okay, great, but what does that actually look like, and how's that implemented technologically? Because it can be done many different ways and depending on the content.
Big takeaway for me in working with awesome writing disciplines was really understanding what the learning objectives were for the course, what was appropriate for the level, and what was appropriate for the discipline or field, given that we are helping prepare the future, and how much are they going to be expected to know about and utilize these tools, regardless of what pathway they take after college. I think that was really a good eye opener for me, and so I'm glad to have these conversations.
And we are working on keeping the conversations going between the community of practice and the community at large, and continue to document and put things up on the site, because I think it's critical that does happen. And all those, that's why I wanted to start with Emma when she was here, because if I'm teaching a composition class as I used to, or something like that, versus a programming class, it's just very different concerns and maybe very different anxieties that you have to face around it. And we need to see that spectrum and have people interacting, which is what we're trying to facilitate.
Everybody should eat cupcakes. And then I really want to thank the panelists, but I specifically really want to thank Chris and Marissa for the work that they've been doing on this. As well as Darcy and Frankie for all of the logistical support of this event. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Eat cupcakes.
And all you for giving us the space.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
And all the faculty for all their time. Thank you.